In the news tonight, the Prime Minister and his Palestinian counterpart agreed to further enhance economic cooperation and vow nothing will blemish the solid Jordanian-Palestinian relations. Saudi Arabia says it shot down a Scud missile fired by Houthi rebels as the United Nations announces it will convene Yemen peace talks on June 14. And an alliance of Islamist groups said they overran Syrian army outposts and villages in the western Idlib province. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. The United Nations announced it will convene peace talks between Yemen's warring factions in Geneva on June 14. Plans for talks in Switzerland last month were postponed due to objections by the exiled Yemeni government, which wants the Houthi militia to first quit Yemen's main cities and recognize President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi's authority. The Houthis wanted a ceasefire as a precondition for talks. Earlier today, however, Saudi military forces launched airstrikes against Yemen's Houthi rebels and forces loyal to the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh near the Saudi-Yemeni border. An alliance of Gulf Arab nations has been bombing the Houthi militia and allied army units loyal to Saleh since March 26 in an attempt to restore exiled President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi to power. Saudi-led forces said 4 Saudi troops, including an officer, were killed after an attack was launched from the Yemeni side on border areas in Jizan and Najran. In a major escalation of 2 months of war, the Houthi group and its army allies fired a Scud missile at Saudi Arabia, which the kingdom said it shot down. A statement by the Saudi military said that in the first use of the long-range ballistic Scud in the conflict, the missile was fired early today at the city of Khamis Mshet in the kingdom's southwest and was intercepted by 2 Patriot missiles. The area is home to the largest Air Force base in southern Saudi Arabia. The violence comes despite progress towards United Nations-backed peace talks planned for Geneva at the end of this month. Syrian rebels and a monitor said opposition groups overrun Syrian army outposts and villages in western Idlib province, closing on coastal strongholds of President Bashar al-Assad's government. The Syrian army said its troops had abandoned the town of Habbal, which passes along a major highway from the city of Aleppo in the north to the coastal port city of Latakia. But the military added that government forces were regrouping for a counter-offensive. The alliance, including Al-Nusra Front, calls its operation the Army of Fatah. Syrian state television later said it killed tens of what it called terrorists and destroyed large convoys carrying Nusra Front fighters in a series of air raids on their positions in a string of villages rebels had taken over. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said large caches of weapons were abandoned by the army when they fled the area. The main province is strategically located, bordering Turkey and adjoining Latakia, the coastal province on the Mediterranean. And in Iraq, government forces and allied Shiite militia fighters said they have advanced in areas of Salahuddin province in preparation for an attack on the Daesh-held city of Ramadi. Fighters are reported to have pushed toward the city in order to surround it and put more pressure on the terrorists in Anbar province. Heavy clashes erupted with Daesh terrorists on the outskirts of Sijariya neighborhood east of Ramadi. Meanwhile, head of Babel province security committee said Iraqi forces deployed in the Khalidiyya and Habbaniya areas will also participate in the campaign to liberate Ramadi and the center of Anbar province. Last month, the Iraqi government had its worst military setback in nearly a year when the terrorist group seized Ramadi from the Iraqi army. Meantime, the United States and its allies have conducted 21 airstrikes targeting Daesh militants in Iraq and Syria over the past 24 hours. 14 airstrikes conducted in Iraq using fighter and drone aircraft targeted areas near Baghdadi, Biji, Habbaniya, Haditha, Makhmur, Mosul, Sinjar and Tal Afar. While in Syria, 7 airstrikes using bomber, attack and fighter aircraft hit near Al-Hasaka and Kobani. The body of former Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz was moved from the southern province of the Qar to Baghdad in order to be handed over to his relatives. An Iraqi elite special forces accompanied the ambulance carrying the body. Aziz's son said his family had yet to hear from the Iraqi government or its embassy in Amman to inform them whether or not they can receive the body or bury it in Jordan. Aziz died in prison yesterday after suffering from a severe heart attack. UN agencies in Israel and the Palestinian territories reported an alarming number of child victims in last year's war in the Gaza Strip. In a 22-page UN country report, strong language was used on alleged violations of children's rights in the Gaza war. It specified what it said were unlawful deaths and injuries of Palestinian children caused by Israeli forces, detention of Palestinian children, and attacks on schools. The report was prepared by United Nations agencies on the ground for submission to the UN Special Envoy for Children and Armed Conflict as she readied a draft of the annual list. In the draft, Special Envoy Leila Zerougi of Algeria included Israel's army and Hamas group and sent it to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who has final say on the list. However, in a section that would appear to undermine the case for listing Israel, the country report said the heads of the UN agencies on the ground had failed to reach consensus on whether Israel should be put on a list of violators of children's rights. An Egyptian court overturned a decision naming Palestinian group Hamas a terrorist organization. The Urgent Matters Appeals Court cited a lack of jurisdiction as a reason for annulling the earlier court's ruling. Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zuhri welcomed the court's ruling, saying it would have positive consequences on the relationship between Hamas and Egypt. Egypt initially declared the group a terrorist organization in February, accusing it of supporting an insurgency in Egypt's northern Sinai. Here at home, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour held talks with his Palestinian counterpart Rami Hamdallah and said Jordan is keen on further cementing the already deep ties between the two peoples. Mansour said no one should be allowed to sour the close brotherly ties between Jordan and Palestine, referring to the aftermath of the vote for the presidency of the World Football governing body FIFA in Zurich. Mansour reiterated his Majesty King Abdullah's support for the resumption of political negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, leading to the setting up of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Hamdallah said he resented the negative aftermath of the FIFA ballot, calling it a passing summer cloud, and stressing that the Palestinian public opinion is clear about the issue. The Palestinian Prime Minister stressed the need to enhance economic ties and take down any barriers to bilateral trade. Hamdallah also briefed Mansour on reconstruction efforts in the Gaza Strip to provide Gazan families with housing after Israel's devastating war on the territory last summer. Speaking to reporters, Hamdallah said the Palestinians and Jordan are in constant coordination, calling the kingdom the breathing lung for the Palestinian people and leadership. He underlined Jordan's custodianship of holy shrines in occupied Jerusalem.
The Hashemite patronage of the Islamic holy sites in occupied Jerusalem is extremely important to safeguard and preserve these shrines. The Palestinian leadership, government and people thank His Majesty King Abdullah for the Hashemite custody that aims to maintain the Al-Aqsa Mosque and holy places.
Separately, the Prime Minister led a meeting to discuss progress of projects funded by the grant from Gulf Arab countries. Mansour told the meeting that the government is in a race against the clock to ensure that the allocated funds are spent in due time over the span of 5 years. He said authorities are keen to disperse the funds according to their set dates, warning that failure to do so means lots of missed opportunities and hundreds of millions in lost dinars. To maximize the Gulf grant, he said, agreement had been reached to shift capital projects to priority projects. During the meeting, it was agreed to expedite the launch of 4 industrial estates in Madaba, Tafila, Jarash and Balqa, in addition to equipment of military hospitals in Mafraq, Jarash and Ajloun, as well as the National Broadband Project. Thousands of demonstrators marched in the German resort town of Garmisch-Partenkirchen to protest against a meeting of leaders from the Group of 7 G7 that starts tomorrow. Demonstrators scuffled with police who outnumbered them massively when some protesters tried to break through police lines. Several protesters were injured as police responded with pepper spray after protesters threw bottles at them. Some 17,000 German police have been deployed around the summit site in the Bavarian Alps, and another 2,000 Austrian police were on standby across the nearby border. German Chancellor Angela Merkel will welcome the leaders of Britain, Canada, France, Italy, Japan, the United States and the European Union at the meeting. The summit is expected to focus on issues like climate change, the fight against pandemics, Middle East turmoil and the upsurge of violence in Ukraine. Pope Francis urged Bosnians to seek lasting ethnic and religious harmony to heal the deep wounds of the devastating Balkan War. Addressing a mass at Sarajevo Stadium, the Pope said, "The cry of God's people goes up once again from this city, the cry of all men and women of goodwill, war never again." The Pope listed the sufferings endured by Bosnians, mentioning refugee camps, destroyed homes and factories, and shattered lives. The head of the Roman Catholic Church arrived in Bosnia days after a landmark EU agreement on closer ties with Bosnia went into force. Earlier at a meeting with a three-member Bosnian presidency, the Pope said peace initiatives between Bosnia's Croats, Serbs and Bosniaks showed that even the deepest wounds can be healed by purifying memories and firmly anchoring hope in the future. The death toll from a Chinese cruise ship which capsized during a storm in the Yangtze River climbed to 396. Only 14 people survived the accident and fewer than 50 are still missing. More than 3,000 people and hundreds of ships were searching waters in Yiyang City in central China's Yunnan province in the hope of rescuing the missing victims. The ship was carrying 456 people on a trip along the Yangtze River when it capsized in a storm on Monday. The boat operator apologized and said it would cooperate with investigations. A European Space Agency astronaut has recorded a show and tell video demonstrating how to prepare a meal on board of the International Space Station. Italian astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti gave step-by-step instructions on how to prepare a gourmet meal in zero gravity as she cooks a meal of red rice with peas and chicken turmeric. In the weightless environment of space, the biggest challenge is to keep all the ingredients of the meal together. The European Space Agency allows its astronauts a certain amount of the so-called bonus food to enjoy during their missions.
A scissor to open the food pouch. So I'm gonna spread it on the tortilla. It's kind of hot. Okay, next I will add the brown rice.
Underway right now in Berlin is the Champions League final between La Liga winners Barcelona and Serie A victors Juventus. In the 4th minute of the game, Rakitic scored for Barca, leading them with 1-0. Thousands of fans from the two teams arrived in Berlin, either through flying or trains, buses or by car. 74,000 fans will fill the stadium to watch the match, the first final to be staged in Berlin. Though Juve did not expect to reach the finals, the Italian champions are hopeful of causing an upset. As for Barca, they are one match away from winning their first ever treble after their domestic league and cup double. World number 1 Serena Williams clinched her 20th Grand Slam singles title when she outlasted Czech Lucie Safarova to win the French Open. The American champion in 2002 and 2013 won 6-3, 6-7, 6-2. She now is third in the list of all-time major champions behind Australian Margaret Court and German Steffi Graf. In the men's singles, world number 1 Novak Djokovic stayed on course for a career slam when he beat British third seed Andy Murray to reach the final of the French Open. With a 6-3, 6-3, 5-7, 5-7, 6-1 victory, Djokovic will play his third Roland Garros final in 4 years tomorrow against Swiss Stan Wawrinka. And finally, a quick look at the weather. Relatively cold night in much of the hilly areas and pleasant in the rest of the kingdom. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected with a high of 30 degrees in Amman and northwesterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect a fair night and relatively hot day tomorrow with northerly gentle winds picking up at times and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. The Prime Minister and his Palestinian counterpart agreed to further enhance economic cooperation and vow nothing will blemish the solid Jordanian-Palestinian relations. Saudi Arabia says it shot down a Scud missile fired by Houthi rebels as the United Nations announces it will convene Yemen peace talks on the 14th. And an alliance of Islamist groups say they overran Syrian army outposts and villages in the western Idlib province. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.